What if everything you've ever believed about motivation was incomplete? What if the real secret to extraordinary success has been hiding in plain sight? Every year, millions of people promise themselves that this time will be different. Yet weeks later, their goals disappear beneath distraction, doubt, and exhaustion. But some people break the cycle. They don't rely on motivation. They build something far more powerful. They create systems that continue working when emotions fail. They train their minds to act when comfort demands surrender. And over time, those small decisions become extraordinary lives. This audiobook will take you inside the psychology of achievement. You'll discover why some people transform themselves while others remain stuck. Welcome to Motivation Mastery.
Like, share, subscribe now.
Chapter 1. The Great Motivation Myth. Imagine waking up tomorrow with unlimited motivation. You leap out of bed before the alarm rings. You exercise enthusiastically. You study without distraction. You complete difficult work without hesitation. You avoid procrastination. You remain focused for hours. Now ask yourself a simple question. If motivation alone determines success, why do so many highly motivated people fail? This question changes everything. Most people spend their entire lives chasing motivation as if it were a permanent resource. They watch inspirational videos. They read motivational quotes. They wait for the perfect feeling, the perfect mood, the perfect moment. But motivation was never designed to be permanent. Motivation is emotional fuel, and emotions are temporary. Think about your own experiences. How many times have you promised yourself that tomorrow would be different? How many Monday mornings have started with excitement and ended with disappointment? How many goals have been abandoned, not because they were impossible, but because the emotional energy that started them eventually disappeared? This isn't a personal failure, it's human psychology. Your human brain evolved for survival, not achievement. Your ancestors did not need 6-month productivity plans or 5-year career strategies. They needed immediate action, immediate rewards, and immediate safety. This ancient operating system still exists inside every human being. And that creates one of the greatest conflicts of modern life. Part of you wants growth. Part of you wants comfort. Part of you dreams about becoming extraordinary. Part of you wants to avoid discomfort at all costs. Success begins when you stop fighting this reality and start understanding it. Consider the story of 2 students preparing for an important examination. The first student waits until inspiration arrives. Some days they study intensely. Other days they avoid studying completely. Their performance depends entirely on their emotional state. The second student develops a simple system. Every day at exactly the same time, regardless of mood, they sit down and begin. After 6 months, who succeeds? Not necessarily the more talented student. Not necessarily the more intelligent student. The winner is usually the person who depended less on motivation. This principle appears everywhere.
Professional athletes train when they feel tired. Successful entrepreneurs work through uncertainty. Great artists create despite self-doubt. Accomplished musicians practice even when inspiration disappears. The public often sees the results. They rarely see the system, and that misunderstanding creates enormous frustration. People assume successful individuals possess some magical psychological advantage. They don't. They simply understand that motivation is unreliable. Discipline, however, can be trained. Habits can be constructed. Systems can be designed. Identity can be transformed. Imagine a pilot attempting to fly across an ocean while relying only on favorable winds. Sometimes progress would be fast. Sometimes movement would stop entirely. Now imagine another pilot using instruments, navigation systems, planning, and consistent adjustments. Which pilot reaches the destination more often? Your life operates under the same principle. Motivation is wind. Systems are navigation. One changes constantly, the other creates direction. The challenge, therefore, is not becoming more motivated. The challenge is becoming less dependent on motivation. And once you understand that distinction, an entirely new world of personal growth becomes possible. Because the people you admire most were not born with endless motivation. They learned how to continue when motivation disappeared, and that skill changed everything. Chapter 2. The Invisible Battle Inside Your Mind. There is a conversation happening inside your mind right now. It never stops. It influences every decision you make. It determines whether you act, hesitate, persist, or quit. Most people never learn to recognize it, but those who do gain one of the greatest advantages imaginable. Every human being contains competing psychological systems. One seeks immediate pleasure. Another seeks long-term fulfillment. One fears discomfort. Another desires growth. One protects who you are. Another imagines who you could become. Understanding this internal conflict is the beginning of self-mastery. And once you learn to observe your mind rather than obey every thought it produces, your entire relationship with motivation begins to change.
Chapter 2. The Invisible Battle Inside Your Mind. There is a conversation happening inside your mind right now. It has been happening since you woke up this morning. In fact, it has been happening for your entire life. You may not always notice it. Sometimes it becomes background noise. Sometimes it feels so natural that you mistake it for reality itself. But whether you recognize it or not, this internal conversation influences nearly every decision you make. It influences whether you get out of bed when the alarm rings. It influences whether you exercise or stay on the couch. It influences whether you pursue your dreams or postpone them for another day. It influences whether you continue when life becomes difficult or decide that perhaps you were never capable in the first place. Most people spend their entire lives controlled by this invisible conversation without ever learning how it works. But the individuals who learn to observe it, understand it, and eventually guide it gain access to one of the greatest advantages available to any human being: the ability to master yourself. To understand why this internal battle exists, we need to begin with a simple truth. You are not one mind. At least, not in the way most people imagine. Inside every human being exist multiple competing systems, each with its own priorities, fears, desires, and objectives. One part of your mind seeks immediate comfort. Another part seeks long-term fulfillment. One part wants certainty. Another part wants growth. One part wants safety. Another part wants adventure. And these systems are constantly negotiating with each other. Imagine for a moment that your mind is not a single voice, but an entire boardroom. At the table sits a cautious protector whose primary objective is survival. This part of you constantly asks questions like, what if we fail? What if people judge us? What if this becomes too difficult? What if we're disappointed? Next to this protector sits the comfort seeker. The comfort seeker loves familiarity. It loves routines, entertainment, convenience, and avoiding unnecessary discomfort. The comfort seeker whispers, "We can start tomorrow. We deserve a break. One more episode won't hurt. Today has already been difficult." Then there is another voice, a quieter voice, a voice that often gets ignored. The voice of possibility. This voice asks different questions. What if we're capable of more? What if growth requires discomfort? What if our future depends on what we do today? What if this challenge changes our life? The battle between these voices creates the experience we call motivation. Consider what happens when you decide to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to exercise. The night before, your future-oriented self is excited. You imagine becoming healthier, stronger, more confident, more disciplined. The decision feels easy. Then 5 o'clock arrives. The alarm sounds.
And suddenly, a completely different part of your brain enters the conversation. The comfort seeker wakes up. The protector wakes up. The voices begin. You didn't sleep enough. You can exercise tomorrow. Missing one day won't matter. Rest is important. Notice something fascinating. These arguments feel logical. They don't feel like excuses. They feel like truth. That is why internal battles are so difficult to recognize. Your brain rarely announces, "I am sabotaging your long-term goals." Instead, it presents immediate comfort as wisdom. And because these thoughts originate inside your own mind, you naturally trust them. This is one of the greatest psychological challenges human beings face. We assume that every thought deserves our belief. But thoughts are not commands. Thoughts are not predictions. Thoughts are not reality. They are mental events, nothing more. Imagine sitting beside a busy highway. Thousands of vehicles pass every hour. Some are large, some are small, some are noisy, some barely make a sound. Now imagine believing that you must chase every vehicle that passes. That would be absurd. Yet many people spend their entire lives chasing every thought that enters their minds. A thought says, "I'm not good enough." They believe it. A thought says, "This is impossible." They believe it. A thought says, "I'll never change." They believe it. A thought says, "Other people are naturally better than me." They believe it. And eventually, those beliefs begin creating reality, not because they were true, but because they were accepted without question. This realization changed the life of a young entrepreneur named Daniel. Daniel spent years believing he lacked discipline. He started projects enthusiastically and abandoned them weeks later. He purchased productivity courses, he bought planners, he watched motivational videos late into the night. Every failure reinforced his conclusion: I am simply not disciplined. Then one day, he encountered a question that disturbed him. What if the problem isn't your discipline? What if the problem is your identity? At first, he rejected the idea. His failures seemed obvious. The evidence appeared overwhelming. But he decided to conduct an experiment. For 30 days, he stopped telling himself that he lacked discipline. Instead, whenever he completed even the smallest productive action, he told himself, "I am becoming someone who follows through." He repeated after reading one page, after completing one task, after exercising for 5 minutes, after waking up on time. Nothing dramatic happened during the first week, or the second, but by the end of the month, something unexpected occurred. His behavior began changing, not because he forced himself harder, not because he discovered magical motivation, but because he had begun changing the story he told himself about who he was. This illustrates one of the most powerful psychological principles ever discovered. Human beings act consistently with their identity. If you believe you are lazy, your brain unconsciously searches for evidence supporting that identity. If you believe you are incapable, your brain notices failures while ignoring successes. If you believe you are weak, every challenge becomes proof. But if you begin constructing a new identity, your behavior slowly follows. This process is uncomfortable because identity change feels like dishonesty at first. A person who has never exercised feels strange saying, "I am becoming healthy." A person who struggles with confidence feels uncomfortable saying, "I am becoming confident." A person who procrastinates feels foolish saying,
I am becoming disciplined. Why? Because the old identity fights back. Remember the boardroom inside your mind. The protector sees change as danger. The comfort seeker sees change as inconvenience. Both resist transformation, and that resistance creates internal conflict. Many people interpret this conflict as evidence that they are incapable. In reality, conflict often means growth is occurring. Consider learning to ride a bicycle. At first, every movement feels unnatural. Balancing feels impossible. Falling seems inevitable. But eventually, through repetition, what once felt impossible becomes automatic. Mental transformation follows the same pattern. The first time you wake up early despite resistance, it feels difficult. The 10th time feels easier. The 100th time becomes part of who you are. This process reveals a profound truth. Success is rarely about winning one dramatic battle. It is about winning thousands of tiny, invisible victories. The battle to begin, the battle to continue, the battle to ignore excuses, the battle to tolerate discomfort, the battle to remain consistent when results are invisible. Every extraordinary life is built upon these invisible victories. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: you do not need to eliminate the voices of fear, comfort, and doubt. They will always exist. The goal is not silence. The goal is leadership. To hear fear without obeying it, to experience discomfort without surrendering to it, to acknowledge doubt without allowing it to define you. Because the strongest people in the world are not individuals who never experience internal conflict. They are individuals who learned how to act despite it. And once you understand this truth, something remarkable happens. You stop asking, "How do I become motivated?" And you begin asking a far more powerful question: "Who am I becoming?" That question changes everything. And in the next chapter, we will explore the hidden force that determines whether that transformation succeeds or fails: your environment.
Chapter 3. The environment that controls your motivation. Imagine two people attempting to change their lives. The first person places a bowl of candy on their desk, leaves their phone beside their bed, keeps social media notifications activated, works in a noisy environment, sleeps irregularly, and then wonders why discipline feels impossible. The second person removes distractions, creates routines, prepares their environment in advance, and designs their surroundings to support their goals. Now ask yourself a question. Which person possesses greater willpower? Most people immediately choose the second person. But that answer reveals one of the greatest misconceptions about motivation and self-discipline. Because success is often determined not by who possesses more willpower, but by who has designed a better environment. This realization is uncomfortable. We prefer to believe that achievement is purely personal. We want to imagine that success comes from character, determination, intelligence, or talent. But human beings are profoundly influenced by their surroundings. In fact, your environment influences your behavior long before conscious decision-making begins. Look around the room you are sitting in right now. Every object around you tells a story. Every object encourages certain behaviors and discourages others. A television invites entertainment. A comfortable bed encourages rest. A smartphone encourages distraction. A bookshelf encourages learning. A gym encourages physical activity. The fascinating part is that most people never consciously design these influences. Instead, they inherit environments accidentally. And then they blame themselves for behaviors that those environments naturally produce. Consider something simple. Imagine placing a bowl of fresh fruit in the center of your kitchen table. Now imagine placing a box of sweets beside your bed. Which food will you consume more frequently? Most people assume their personal preferences determine the answer. Research and experience suggest otherwise. Human beings are remarkably predictable. We tend to choose what is easiest. We move toward what is visible. We repeat what is convenient. And we avoid what creates friction. This principle extends far beyond food. It influences your finances, your relationships, your productivity, your fitness, your career, and ultimately your identity. Think back to a period in your life when you were highly productive. What surrounded you? Perhaps you had structure. Perhaps you had supportive friends. Perhaps you had fewer distractions. Perhaps your environment made success easier. Now, think about a period when you struggled. What changed?
For many people, the answer is not a lack of intelligence or ambition. It is a change in environment. This insight transformed the life of a university student named Sarah. Sarah believed she lacked discipline. Every evening she promised herself she would study. Every evening she failed. She blamed herself relentlessly. She called herself lazy. She compared herself to successful classmates. She consumed endless motivational content, hoping to discover what was wrong with her. Then one day she noticed something. Every attempt to study occurred in the same environment. Her phone remained beside her. Television played in the background. Friends interrupted her frequently. Social media notifications appeared constantly. Her environment had been designed for distraction, not for focus. So Sarah conducted a simple experiment. She moved to a quiet library. She turned off notifications. She placed her phone in another room. She established a fixed study location. Suddenly, something incredible happened. Studying became easier. Not effortless, not automatic, but easier. And that distinction changed everything. Most people attempt to increase motivation. Very few attempt to reduce resistance. Yet reducing resistance is often the faster path. Imagine trying to swim against a powerful current. You can become stronger. You can become more determined. You can become more motivated. Or you can step out of the river. Environment design is stepping out of the river. It means creating conditions where success becomes the default option rather than the constant struggle. Professional athletes understand this. Elite performers understand this. High achievers in every field understand this. They do not rely exclusively on self-control. They engineer circumstances. A writer creates a dedicated workspace. An athlete prepares their equipment the night before. An entrepreneur structures their calendar carefully. A student removes distractions before studying begins. None of these actions appear extraordinary, but together they produce extraordinary results. The challenge is that human beings often underestimate environmental influence because it feels invisible. You don't notice the effect of your surroundings, you simply experience the results. A cluttered room gradually creates mental fatigue. Negative relationships gradually reduce confidence. Constant digital stimulation gradually destroys attention. Poor routines gradually weaken discipline. The process happens slowly, so slowly that it feels natural, until one day you realize you have become someone you never intended to become. The good news is that this process works both ways. Positive environments also create transformation. Imagine entering a room designed entirely for creativity. Natural light fills the space. Distractions are absent. Necessary tools are easily accessible. The environment itself encourages action. Now imagine entering a gym filled with individuals working hard. Without realizing it, your own standards begin to rise. This reveals another powerful truth. Human beings are social mirrors. We unconsciously absorb the attitudes, behaviors, expectations, and beliefs of those around us. Spend enough time with pessimistic people, and pessimism begins to feel rational. Spend enough time with ambitious people, and ambition begins to feel normal. Spend enough time with disciplined individuals, and discipline becomes expected. Your environment is not merely physical, it is psychological, it is social, it is emotional. It includes the conversations you hear, the content you consume, the people you admire, the habits you observe, the standards you accept. This is why transformation sometimes requires difficult decisions. Sometimes growth demands changing your surroundings. Sometimes growth demands protecting your attention. Sometimes growth demands creating distance from environments that no longer serve your future. This can feel uncomfortable because environments provide identity, they provide familiarity, they provide safety. Yet every major transformation in human history has required individuals willing to leave familiar environments behind. The student leaving home, the entrepreneur leaving a secure job, the athlete leaving comfort for training, the artist leaving certainty for creativity. Growth and comfort have always existed in tension. And perhaps the most important realization is this: you do not rise to the level of your goals, you often fall to the level of your environment. If your environment supports distraction, distraction becomes inevitable. If your environment supports discipline, discipline becomes easier. If your environment supports growth, growth becomes natural. This does not mean your environment controls your destiny. It means your environment influences your probability of success. And once you understand this principle, you stop asking, "How can I become more motivated?" and begin asking, "How can I make success easier?" That question changes everything, because motivation may disappear, willpower may weaken, emotions may fluctuate, but a well-designed environment continues working quietly, day after day, long after inspiration fades. And in the next chapter, we will discover the hidden force that transforms small actions into extraordinary results, the science of habits.
Chapter 4: The Science of Habits and Automatic Success. Imagine if every important action in your life required a major decision. Imagine if every morning you had to negotiate with yourself about brushing your teeth. Imagine if every meal required an internal debate. Imagine if every time you wanted to drive a car, you had to consciously remember every movement of your hands, feet, and eyes. Life would become exhausting. Fortunately, the human brain developed an extraordinary ability. It can automate behavior. This ability is one of the greatest gifts ever given to our species, and it is also one of the greatest reasons people succeed or fail. Because whether you realize it or not, your life is largely governed by habits. Not motivation, not inspiration, not occasional bursts of determination. Habits. Researchers have long estimated that a significant percentage of our daily behavior occurs automatically. We wake up in similar ways. We travel familiar routes. We react with predictable emotions. We repeat routines without conscious thought. In many ways, human beings are creatures of repetition. This realization can feel unsettling. After all, we prefer to think of ourselves as entirely rational and fully conscious beings. But consider your own experience. How many times have you picked up your phone without deciding to? How many times have you opened social media simply because you felt a brief moment of boredom? How many times have you driven somewhere and barely remembered the journey? That is the power of automatic behavior. And once you understand how habits work, you begin to understand why some people appear extraordinarily disciplined,
They are not constantly forcing themselves. They are often operating on systems that have become automatic. Imagine two individuals trying to become physically fit. The first person depends on motivation. Every morning becomes a negotiation. Do I feel like exercising today? Am I tired? Should I rest? Maybe tomorrow would be better. Every workout requires a battle. The second person approaches the problem differently. Instead of asking whether they feel motivated, they create a routine. Every day at 6 o'clock, they put on their shoes. Every day at 6:15, they leave the house. Every day at 6:30, they begin moving. After enough repetition, exercise stops feeling like a decision. It becomes part of their identity. This distinction changes everything, because the ultimate goal of self-improvement is not to force yourself forever. The goal is to automate excellence. To understand how this process works, imagine a trail through a forest. The first time someone walks through the forest, progress is difficult. Branches block the path. Grass covers the ground. Every step requires effort. But if that same path is walked repeatedly, something remarkable happens.
The trail becomes easier. The grass disappears. The route becomes visible. Eventually, movement becomes effortless. Your brain functions in a similar way. Every repeated behavior strengthens a mental pathway. Every repeated action becomes easier. Every repeated thought becomes more automatic. This principle works whether the habit is beneficial or destructive. Consider procrastination. Most people assume procrastination is a character flaw, but procrastination is often simply a habit. Imagine a student who feels uncomfortable while studying. They open their phone. The discomfort disappears temporarily. Their brain learns a lesson. Discomfort equals phone. The next day, the same thing happens, then again and again. Eventually, the response becomes automatic. The student no longer consciously chooses distraction. Their brain has created a shortcut. This explains why changing habits can feel so difficult. You are not simply changing behavior, you are attempting to redirect pathways built through repetition. This process requires patience. Imagine trying to redirect a river. You cannot simply command the water to flow elsewhere. You must gradually create a new channel. Eventually, the river follows the new path. Human behavior follows the same principle. This understanding transformed the life of a businessman named Michael. For years, Michael believed he lacked focus. Every morning, he arrived at work determined to be productive. Every afternoon, he found himself distracted. He blamed technology. He blamed stress. He blamed himself. Then, one day, he decided to observe his behavior without judgment. What he discovered surprised him. Every time he encountered a difficult task, he experienced anxiety. Every time anxiety appeared, he checked email. Every time he checked email, he experienced temporary relief. His distraction was not random, it was a habit loop. The difficult task created discomfort. The discomfort triggered avoidance. The avoidance created relief. The relief reinforced the habit. Once Michael understood the pattern, he stopped fighting himself. Instead, he redesigned the routine. Whenever discomfort appeared, he committed to working for just 2 minutes. Not 2 hours, not 30 minutes, 2 minutes. At first, this seemed insignificant, but over time, something extraordinary happened. The habit changed. The automatic response became action rather than avoidance. This reveals one of the greatest secrets of habit formation. Small actions matter more than dramatic intentions. Human beings love dramatic transformation. We love stories about people who completely reinvent themselves overnight.
We admire sudden breakthroughs. We celebrate extraordinary moments. But real transformation usually happens differently. Real transformation is quiet. A person reads 5 pages every day. An athlete trains consistently. A student studies for 30 minutes daily. An entrepreneur improves one process at a time. The changes appear insignificant until they accumulate. Imagine improving by just 1% every day. 1% feels meaningless. It feels invisible. It feels almost embarrassing.
Yet over months and years, tiny improvements create extraordinary outcomes. A tree does not become enormous overnight. A building is not constructed in a single day. A masterpiece is not painted in 1 hour. Everything remarkable emerges through accumulation. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. Small negative habits accumulate. One missed workout becomes several. 1 hour of distraction becomes years. One excuse becomes an identity. This is why habits are so powerful. They do not merely influence your actions, they shape your future. And perhaps the most important habit of all is the habit of keeping promises to yourself. Consider what happens when you repeatedly break commitments. You promise to wake up early. You don't. You promise to exercise. You don't. You promise to study. You don't. Eventually, your brain learns something dangerous. It learns that your promises are unreliable. Your confidence decreases. Your self-respect weakens. Your identity suffers. Now consider the opposite. You make small promises, you keep them. You make another promise, you keep that one too. Gradually, you build evidence. Evidence that you can trust yourself. Evidence that you can follow through. Evidence that you are becoming someone different. Confidence is not created through positive thinking. Confidence is created through evidence, and habits are the mechanism through which that evidence is built. This explains why successful people often appear calm. Their confidence does not depend on emotion, it depends on repetition. A professional musician trusts years of practice. An athlete trusts thousands of training sessions. A writer trusts countless hours of work. Their confidence comes from proof, not hope, not motivation, proof. Perhaps this is the greatest misunderstanding about success. People believe successful individuals possess extraordinary motivation. In reality, they often possess extraordinary consistency. They learned to continue when excitement disappeared. They learned to trust systems more than emotions. They learned to value repetition more than inspiration. And over time, those repeated actions became habits. Those habits became identity, and that identity created success. The beautiful truth is that every person listening to these words possesses the same ability. You do not need extraordinary talent. You do not need perfect conditions. You do not need endless motivation. You only need a willingness to repeat small actions long enough for them to become part of who you are. Because every habit you repeat casts a vote for the person you are becoming, a vote for your future, a vote for your identity. The question, therefore, is not whether habits shape your life. They already do. The question is whether you will choose them consciously. Because once habits become automatic, success itself begins to feel automatic. And in the next chapter, we will explore one of the most misunderstood forces in human achievement, the hidden relationship between failure, resilience, and extraordinary success. Chapter 5. Why Failure Creates Success.
Imagine 2 people standing at the base of a mountain. Both have the same dream. Both possess intelligence. Both possess talent. Both want to reach the summit. The first person takes a few steps upward, slips, falls, and immediately concludes, "Perhaps I'm not meant to climb this mountain." The second person takes the same steps, experiences the same fall, and asks a different question. What can this fall teach me? Years later, one person remains at the bottom of the mountain, wondering what might have been. The other stands at the summit. The difference was not talent. The difference was not luck. The difference was their relationship with failure. This relationship determines more human potential than almost any other factor. Yet from the moment we are born, many of us learn to fear failure. As children, we fear making mistakes. As students, we fear wrong answers. As adults, we fear embarrassment, rejection, criticism, disappointment, and uncertainty. Eventually, failure stops becoming an event. It becomes an identity. People stop saying, "I failed," and begin saying, "I am a failure." That single change in language changes everything, because if failure becomes identity, growth becomes impossible. Imagine a child learning to walk. The child falls, again and again and again. No parent watches this process and says, "Clearly, walking isn't for you." No child concludes, "I've fallen 12 times, I should probably quit." Failure is expected. Failure is normal. Failure is understood as part of learning. But somewhere along the journey into adulthood, many people forget this truth. They begin expecting mastery without mistakes, progress without discomfort, success without struggle. And when reality fails to match those expectations, they interpret the experience as proof of inadequacy. This misunderstanding destroys countless dreams. Consider the world's greatest athletes. How many times did they lose? How many times did they fail? How many times did they doubt themselves? The public sees championships. The athlete remembers defeats. Consider entrepreneurs. People admire successful companies. They rarely see the failed businesses, rejected ideas, financial setbacks, and sleepless nights that came before success. Consider writers. Readers see finished books. They never see the countless pages discarded, the chapters rewritten, the stories abandoned, the moments of uncertainty. Success creates an illusion. It hides the failures that produced it. This illusion creates one of the most damaging beliefs in modern culture: the belief that successful people experience less failure. In reality, successful people often experience more failure. The difference is that they interpret failure differently. Imagine failure as a mirror.
Most people look into the mirror and search for evidence of personal weakness. Successful people look into the same mirror and search for information. One asks, "What's wrong with me?" The other asks, "What can I learn?" That distinction changes entire lives. There was once a young inventor who spent years attempting to create a product that nobody wanted. He invested his savings, he sacrificed his comfort, he worked endless hours, and he failed. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. His friends questioned him, his family worried, he questioned himself. Eventually, exhausted and discouraged, he nearly gave up. But before quitting, he decided to perform one final exercise. He wrote down everything his failures had taught him. The list became enormous. He had learned about marketing, about timing, about communication, about leadership, about consumer psychology, about persistence. He realized something extraordinary. He had not spent years failing. He had spent years learning. And those lessons eventually created the foundation for his future success. This pattern appears throughout human history. Failure is rarely wasted unless we refuse to learn from it. The human brain, however, dislikes this idea. Our brains prefer certainty.
They prefer immediate rewards. They prefer emotional safety. Failure threatens all three. When we fail, our minds often produce painful narratives. I'm not talented enough. I'm too old. I'm too inexperienced. I'm not intelligent enough. Other people can do this, but I can't. These thoughts feel convincing, not because they are true, but because failure activates emotional pain, and emotional pain often disguises itself as objective truth. This explains why many people quit immediately after setbacks. They are not responding to reality, they are responding to temporary emotional interpretations of reality. Imagine learning a new language. During the first week, confusion dominates. During the first month, progress feels slow. During the first year, mistakes remain frequent. If mistakes indicated inability, nobody would ever learn anything. Yet mistakes are not evidence of inability, they are evidence of participation. The person making mistakes is learning. The person avoiding mistakes is avoiding growth. This principle extends to every area of life: relationships, business, fitness, education, creativity, leadership, personal transformation. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is often part of the process of success. This realization transformed the mindset of a young athlete named Emma. Emma had dreamed of becoming a professional competitor since childhood. She trained relentlessly. She sacrificed vacations. She sacrificed comfort. She sacrificed countless hours pursuing excellence. Then came the competition that she believed would define her future. She lost, not narrowly, decisively. The defeat shattered her confidence. For weeks she avoided discussing it. She replayed every mistake, every decision, every moment. She convinced herself that years of effort had been wasted. Then her coach asked her a question. If this experience happened to someone you loved, what would you tell them? Emma answered immediately. I'd tell them that one failure doesn't define them. I'd tell them that they learned something valuable. I'd tell them to continue. Her coach smiled. Then why are you speaking differently to yourself? That question changed her life. Because many people treat themselves with a level of cruelty they would never direct toward another human being. They demand perfection. They punish mistakes. They magnify failures. And then they wonder why motivation disappears. Compassion is not weakness. Compassion creates resilience. Because resilience is not the ability to avoid pain. Resilience is the ability to recover from pain. Imagine a tree during a storm. The strongest trees are not always the most rigid. Often they are the most flexible. They bend, they adapt, they survive. Human beings operate similarly. Mental strength is not emotional numbness. Mental strength is adaptability, the ability to experience disappointment without surrendering identity, the ability to experience failure without abandoning purpose, the ability to experience fear without losing direction. This ability can be developed, not through theory, through experience. Every challenge survived creates evidence. Every setback overcome creates confidence. Every failure examined creates wisdom. And gradually, something remarkable happens. You stop fearing failure. Not because failure becomes enjoyable, but because failure becomes meaningful. You begin understanding that every extraordinary achievement carries invisible scars. Every successful person has experienced moments of doubt, moments of embarrassment, moments of uncertainty, moments of defeat. The difference is not that they avoided these experiences. The difference is that they continued through them. Perhaps this is why resilience is one of the greatest predictors of success. Not intelligence, not talent, not resources. Resilience. The willingness to continue, the willingness to adapt, the willingness to learn, the willingness to stand up one more time than you fall. Because ultimately, failure asks only one question: will you continue? And your answer to that question shapes your future more than any talent, opportunity, or circumstance ever could. One day, you will look back on the moments that once felt like devastating failures, and you may discover something surprising. Those moments were not barriers. They were turning points. They were lessons. They were preparation. They were the experiences that transformed you into the person capable of achieving your greatest goals. Because failure does not decide your destiny. Your response to failure does. And in the next chapter, we will explore another powerful truth: why fear itself may be the greatest obstacle standing between you and the life you are capable of creating.
Chapter 6: The Psychology of Fear and Courage. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. The wind moves around you. The ground beneath your feet feels stable, yet every instinct inside your body tells you to step back. Your heart beats faster. Your breathing changes. Your muscles tighten. In that moment, something ancient awakens inside you: fear. For thousands of years, fear has protected human beings from danger. Fear kept our ancestors alive. It warned them about predators, uncertain environments, and life-threatening situations. Without fear, humanity would never have survived. But there is a problem. The human brain evolved far more quickly to recognize danger than it did to distinguish between physical danger and psychological discomfort. As a result, your brain often reacts to a difficult conversation, a business opportunity, public speaking, failure, rejection, and personal growth in much the same way it once reacted to predators. To your nervous system, uncertainty often feels like danger. And because of that, millions of people spend their lives avoiding the very experiences that could transform them. Think about your own life. How many opportunities have you delayed because you weren't ready? How many conversations have you avoided because they felt uncomfortable? How many dreams have remained dreams because taking action felt frightening? Fear rarely appears wearing a label. It rarely announces itself by saying, "Hello, I am fear, and I am preventing your growth." Instead, fear disguises itself. It calls itself logic. It calls itself caution. It calls itself waiting for the right moment. It calls itself preparation. It calls itself realism. And because these explanations sound reasonable, we accept them. Consider the person who dreams of starting a business. They spend years researching, years planning, years preparing. From the outside, this appears responsible, but often beneath the planning exists something else: fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of uncertainty, fear of discovering that the dream may not succeed, or perhaps even more frightening, fear of discovering that it might. This may sound strange. Why would someone fear success? Because success changes identity. Success creates responsibility. Success forces growth, and growth requires leaving behind the comfort of familiarity. The human mind loves certainty. Even painful certainty often feels safer than uncertain possibility. Imagine being trapped in a small room for years. Eventually, the room becomes familiar. It becomes predictable. It becomes comfortable. Now imagine someone opening the door and showing you an entire world outside. Freedom exists beyond the door. Opportunity exists beyond the door. Possibility exists beyond the door. And yet, many people hesitate, not because they prefer the room, but because the unknown feels frightening. This is how fear operates.
It does not always trap us with pain. Sometimes it traps us with familiarity. There was once a young professional named David. For nearly 10 years, David worked in a career that made him deeply unhappy. Every morning, he felt exhausted before the day even began. Every evening, he promised himself that things would eventually change. He dreamed of building his own business. He read books. He attended seminars. He developed plans. Yet year after year, nothing happened. One evening, David asked himself a difficult question. What exactly am I afraid of? At first, the answer seemed obvious: failure. But after deeper reflection, he discovered something surprising. He was not primarily afraid of failing. He was afraid of losing certainty. He was afraid of disappointing others. He was afraid of becoming responsible for his own success. This realization changed everything, because once fear becomes visible, it loses much of its power. Imagine walking through your home at night. A shadow appears. Your imagination immediately begins constructing frightening possibilities. But then you turn on the light and discover that the terrifying shape was simply a chair. Fear often operates in darkness. Awareness turns on the light. This does not eliminate fear, but it transforms fear from a monster into information. One of the greatest misunderstandings about courage is the belief that courageous people experience less fear. This is false. Courageous people experience fear just like everyone else, sometimes more intensely. The difference is that they interpret fear differently. Most people see fear and conclude, "Stop." Courageous people see fear and ask, "Why does this matter so much to me?" Think about the moments in your life that frightened you the most. Falling in love, starting something new, speaking honestly, taking responsibility, pursuing a dream. What do all these experiences have in common? They involve something valuable. Fear often points toward importance. The greater the potential significance of an experience, the greater the fear it may create. This explains why people often avoid pursuing their deepest ambitions, not because they lack desire, but because they care so much. The student who deeply values success fears failure. The entrepreneur who deeply values achievement fears loss. The artist who deeply values creativity fears criticism. The individual who deeply values love fears rejection. Fear and meaning frequently travel together. Understanding this principle changes how we interpret our emotions. Instead of asking, "How do I eliminate fear?" we begin asking, "What is this fear trying to protect?" Sometimes fear protects us from genuine danger, but often fear attempts to protect us from growth. Imagine learning to swim. The first moments in deep water feel terrifying. Your body resists. Your mind imagines disaster. But if you remain in the water long enough, something remarkable occurs. Your nervous system adapts. What once felt impossible becomes manageable. This process is called adaptation, and adaptation changes lives. Every fear becomes smaller through repeated exposure, not because the situation changes, because you change.
The first public speech feels terrifying. The 10th feels uncomfortable. The 100th feels normal. The first difficult conversation feels impossible. The 10th becomes manageable. The 100th becomes routine. Confidence is not something you acquire before action. Confidence is something you build through action. This truth disappoints many people. They want certainty before beginning. They want courage before acting. They want confidence before trying. But life rarely works that way. Action creates confidence.
Experience creates courage. Movement creates momentum. Waiting creates fear. Imagine standing beside a cold swimming pool. The longer you wait, the more frightening the water appears. You analyze, you hesitate, you negotiate. Your fear grows. Then, finally, you jump, and within moments, you adapt. Many opportunities in life work exactly the same way. The anticipation is often more painful than the experience itself. This explains why overthinking can become one of the greatest enemies of growth. Thinking is valuable, but excessive thinking often becomes avoidance disguised as intelligence. There comes a moment when reflection must end and action must begin. Every successful person eventually reaches this moment. The entrepreneur launches despite uncertainty. The athlete competes despite fear. The writer publishes despite criticism. The student takes the exam despite doubt. The leader makes decisions despite imperfect information. Not because fear disappeared, because action became more important than fear. This distinction represents true courage. Courage is not fearlessness. Courage is prioritizing purpose over fear. And perhaps nowhere is this more important than in the pursuit of personal transformation, because changing your life requires confronting countless fears: the fear of failure, the fear of success, the fear of judgment, the fear of rejection, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of becoming someone different. Every meaningful transformation asks you to walk into uncertainty. No map, no guarantees, no promises, only possibility. And that is precisely why so few people do it. Yet every extraordinary achievement in human history began with someone choosing to move forward despite uncertainty, someone choosing to act despite fear, someone choosing courage over comfort. Perhaps courage is not a rare quality possessed by extraordinary people. Perhaps courage is a decision available to ordinary people in extraordinary moments, a decision made repeatedly, a decision made daily, a decision whenever fear attempts to define the limits of our lives. One day you may look back and realize something profound. The moments you feared most were not the moments that destroyed you, they were the moments that revealed who you could become. Because fear is not always a warning sign. Sometimes fear is an invitation to grow, an invitation to transform, an invitation to discover that you are capable of far more than you ever imagined. And in the next chapter, we will explore perhaps the most powerful force in human achievement, the extraordinary influence of identity, belief, and the story you tell yourself about who you are.
Final chapter: the moment you decide. As this journey comes to an end, there is one final truth worth remembering. Everything you have heard in this audiobook, the psychology of motivation, the power of habits, the influence of environment, the role of failure, the reality of fear, and the importance of identity, ultimately leads to a single moment: a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a perfect decision, a simple one. The decision to begin. Throughout history, extraordinary achievements have often started in ordinary moments. A person decides to take one step, one page, one workout, one conversation, one attempt, one promise, and then they repeat that decision again tomorrow. The world often celebrates massive transformations, but the truth is that transformation rarely arrives all at once. It arrives quietly. It arrives through repetition. It arrives through the invisible choices nobody else sees. The choice to continue when motivation disappears. The choice to act when fear appears.
the choice to learn when failure hurts, the choice to remain faithful to the person you are becoming. There will be days when you feel unstoppable. There will also be days when you feel uncertain, tired, distracted, and discouraged. Both kinds of days are part of the journey. Do not wait for perfect motivation. Do not wait for complete confidence. Do not wait for certainty, because certainty rarely comes before action. It comes after. Remember this: you do not become extraordinary by making one extraordinary decision. You become extraordinary by making ordinary decisions extraordinarily well, over and over again. Years from now, you may look back on this moment and realize that nothing changed overnight, but something changed within you. A belief, a standard, a commitment, a decision. And that decision quietly transformed everything that followed. There is a version of you that already exists in possibility, a version that is stronger, more disciplined, more focused, more courageous, more resilient. That person is not someone else. That person is you. Not someday, not when conditions become perfect, not when fear disappears. Now. Because motivation was never the destination. Mastery was. And mastery begins with a single question. What will you do next?